The email arrived at 11:47 p.m., 3 days after they lowered Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi into the ground. Daniel Adeyemi sat motionless in the living room, the laptop screen the only light in the house. The heavy scent of funeral incense and dying flowers still clung to the curtains, a reminder that the whole town had just mourned a man they thought they knew. He stared at the subject line for a long time. DNA results available. This was supposed to be simple revenge. Samuel, the perfect firstborn, had thrown the insult across the table during the inheritance meeting like it was nothing. Before we start dividing everything, maybe we should first establish who the real sons are. A cruel, offhand remark meant to put Daniel, the second son who had quit his job and spent 2 brutal years nursing their father, back in his place. So Daniel had ordered the test in silence, not for truth, for victory. Now his finger hovered. A strange fear gripped him, not the fear of being proven wrong, something worse. What if the results expose more than just Samuel? He clicked. The report opened with cold precision. Daniel scrolled past the medical jargon until the conclusion hit him like a closed fist. The tested individual shows no biological paternal relationship to the alleged father. His heart slammed against his ribs. He checked the names twice. Alleged father, Emmanuel Adeyemi. Tested individual, Samuel Adeyemi. Samuel, not him. The golden son. The one their father had taken everywhere. To business meetings, to the transport yard, to every family occasion. The heir the entire community already treated as the new chief. Daniel felt the room tilt. But if Samuel carried none of their father's blood, then 40 years of legacy had been built on a lie. But that wasn't the only thought that turned his stomach. Because in that same moment, a darker question slithered in. What about me? He had always been the careful one, the quiet observer, the son who noticed things others missed. What if this test had accidentally opened a door to secrets that could destroy not just Samuel, but the entire foundation of who they all thought they were? The old wall clock ticked relentlessly in the hallway. Daniel rubbed his face, breath shallow. He had wanted to prove Samuel wrong. Instead, he may have just proven that nothing in this family was what it seemed. And the most terrifying part? Their father had died carrying whatever truth existed. Or worse, he had died protecting it, and the scent of funeral flowers suddenly felt like a warning. Daniel stared at the glowing screen, the weight of an unread secret pressing heavier than grief. One question burned louder than the rest. Did Chief Adeyemi know? And if he did, what else did he take to the grave with him? The living room was so silent it felt physical, thick, humid, pressing against the skin like the Port Harcourt night had crept inside the walls. Daniel stood by the dining table, the printed DNA report trembling in his hands. Across from him, Samuel stared at the paper as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They refused. Mrs. Grace Adeyemi sat rigid in her chair, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the wall, 40 years in the past. The rest of the family formed a stunned circle, an aunt muttering prayers, a cousin shifting uncomfortably, whispers of, "This cannot be real." But it was very real. "Read it again," Samuel said, voice low and rough. Daniel swallowed. "Samuel, read it again." The command cracked like a whip. Daniel's chest tightened. He wished the ink would smear, that the words would vanish. They didn't. The tested individual shows no biological paternal relationship to the alleged father. The room tilted. Samuel blinked slowly, then let out a short, hollow laugh, the kind that sounded dead in a house still heavy with funeral incense. "No," he said, shaking his head. "This is a mistake." His eyes swung to Daniel, desperate for any sign of a cruel joke. "You're telling me the man I buried with my own hands last week was not my father?" Daniel had no safe words left. Samuel turned to their mother. "Mom, tell him this is wrong." She remained frozen. Then slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. The look in her eyes was not shock. It was recognition. Samuel's face drained of color. "You knew." The words hung like shattered glass. Mrs. Grace's lips trembled. I carried it for so long." Tears slipped down her cheeks. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. What does this mean? Who is his real father? How long have you hidden this? But Samuel heard none of them. He was staring only at Daniel. "You did this," he said, voice cracking with rising fury. "All because you wanted to win an argument about money and sacrifice." Daniel felt the blow land. "I didn't know it would." "You dragged our father's name through a lab while his body was barely cold," Samuel thundered. "You brought strangers into our blood." Samuel's gaze swept the room, the family portraits, the furniture that had watched them grow, the house that now felt like it belonged to strangers. Then he looked back at their mother. Did Dad know? The silence that followed was absolute. Grace closed her eyes for a long moment. That single gesture told them everything. Samuel's shoulders collapsed. His voice broke completely. "So the man I buried 3 days ago was the only one who might have known the full truth?" Daniel felt a deep knot twist in his chest. One careless DNA test had not simply exposed a lie about paternity. It had torn open a web of secrets 40 years in the making. And Daniel, the second son who thought he was only settling a score, now stood at the center of a darkness he could not control. There are truths we spend our entire lives believing. Truths so deeply woven into our bones that questioning them feels like betrayal. You believe the stories whispered to you as a child. You believe the faded photographs on the wall. You believe the man who carried you on his shoulders, corrected your steps, and stood beside you when the world grew cruel. You believe he is your father, because identity is supposed to be simple. Blood, name, legacy. These things should anchor a man. But sometimes the truth is not simple. Sometimes it hides for decades, buried not by accident, but by careful, deliberate silence. A silence maintained through love, fear, shame, and survival. A silence so complete that even the man carrying the heaviest part of it may have convinced himself it no longer mattered, until one careless moment rips the veil away. Sometimes that moment arrives wrapped in anger, a bitter insult thrown across a table during an inheritance fight. Sometimes it arrives through raw curiosity. And sometimes it arrives through something as small and dangerous as a DNA test ordered in secret, simply to win an argument. The problem with truth is that it rarely comes in the shape we expect. It does not knock politely, it detonates. When identity cracks, everything connected to it begins to fracture. Memories, loyalty, belonging, even the love we thought was unbreakable. What we believed was solid ground suddenly feels like quicksand. The Adeyemi family thought they knew their story. They believed Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi was exactly who he appeared to be. The respected patriarch, the quiet builder of a transport empire, and the man whose children carried his name with pride. Samuel, the golden firstborn and heir. Daniel, the dutiful second son. The younger siblings, the devoted wife. They believed the legacy was clean. They were wrong. Beneath the surface lay secrets far older and more tangled than a single act of infidelity. Secrets that may have involved power, money, protection, and choices made in the shadows of Port Harcourt's tight-knit community. Secrets their father may have known. Secrets their mother still guards with trembling hands. Secrets that could reshape not only who belongs in the family, but whose hands truly built the wealth they are now fighting to divide. When that hidden truth finally surfaced, triggered by one resentful son's decision to prove a point, it forced every member of the family to confront a question much larger and more dangerous than inheritance. What truly makes someone a father? Is it the blood that flows through your veins? Or is it the man who chose to raise you day after day, knowing the truth? And if those two answers are not the same person, then who do you really belong to? Worse still, if the man you called father knew the lie and still chose silence, what else did he hide? What debts, what favors, what quiet arrangements kept the family name intact all those years? Because the small piece of paper Daniel received at 11:47 p.m. did not simply expose one man's uncertain parentage. It opened a door to a web of half-truths, protected reputations, and carefully guarded legacies that had sustained the Adeyemi name for decades. Before any of them could understand whether blood or love defines family, everything first had to burn. It all began with a funeral. A respected man had just been buried with full honors. His children gathered, believing they were there to mourn and divide what he left behind. What they didn't know was that the days ahead would not only test their love for one another, but whether the very foundation of their father's life was strong enough to survive the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous question a family can ask is the simplest one. Who really belongs here? And what price was paid to keep that illusion alive? Before the argument, before the secret test, before the truth cracked the family wide open. There was a man the entire town of Port Harcourt still speaks of with a mixture of reverence and quiet unease, Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi. For over 40 years, his name carried weight, not because he was the wealthiest, he wasn't, but because when serious matters needed settling, people came to him. Land disputes, family quarrels that threatened to spill blood, community projects where trust was scarce. Chief Adeyemi listened more than he spoke. When he finally gave his verdict, even powerful men nodded. He built his life the old way, slowly, deliberately. One battered truck hauling goods between Port Harcourt and nearby towns, then 2, then 5. Over time, Adeyemi Transport became a modest but respected company that fed dozens of families. Drivers, mechanics, loaders, many owed their daily bread to the man they called Chief. But what people remembered most was not the business. It was the man himself, disciplined, measured, quietly generous in ways that sometimes raised eyebrows, firm when necessary but rarely cruel. He had a reputation for protecting his own, fiercely. And above all, he was known as a devoted family man. If you asked anyone in the community what Chief Adeyemi valued most, the answer was always the same: his children. 4 of them, 3 sons and 1 daughter. To the outside world, they appeared to be a model family continuing a proud legacy. Inside the walls of their compound, the truth was far more tangled. Samuel Adeyemi had carried the invisible crown of eldest son since he could walk. People spoke to him differently, expected more. When Chief attended community meetings or arbitration sessions, Samuel was often at his right hand. Not because he was the sharpest, but because he was first. The heir apparent. He grew into the role with natural confidence, disciplined like his father, proud of the weight placed on his shoulders. To the town, the handover of Adeyemi Transport looked seamless, the perfect continuation of legacy. But inside the family, Samuel carried something heavier than duty. There were moments, small, fleeting, when Chief would look at him with an expression no one else seemed to notice. A shadow, a hesitation. Samuel had learned early to ignore it. Daniel lived his entire life in that long shadow. Not because Samuel deliberately pushed him there, but because families quietly assign roles early, and roles are hard to escape. Samuel was the chosen one. Daniel became the challenger, thoughtful, capable, quietly ambitious. He worked hard, yet often felt invisible when important decisions were made. Over the years, that quiet frustration hardened into something colder, resentment. It wasn't hatred. It was the ache of always being measured against an older brother who seemed to win by simply existing. When Chief Emmanuel fell seriously ill 2 years before his death, the divide sharpened. Samuel continued running parts of the transport business from the city, sending instructions and money. Daniel did what no one expected. He quit his banking job in Lagos without hesitation and moved back home. For 2 long, brutal years, he became his father's primary caretaker. Hospital runs at midnight, medication schedules, nights spent watching his father fight for breath. And he never complained openly. But inside, a dangerous expectation took root. Surely this sacrifice would be seen. Surely it would count for something when the time came. Tunde, the youngest brother, stayed far from the brewing storm. He worked in Abuja and visited only when necessary, preferring to keep his hands clean and his opinions neutral. Bisi, their only sister, had married into a respected family nearby. She tried, often desperately, to play peacemaker between her brothers. But even she understood that the rivalry between Samuel and Daniel ran decades deep, fed by old wounds, unspoken comparisons, and the silent knowledge that their father's favor had never been evenly distributed. At the quiet center of it all stood Mrs. Grace Adeyemi, gentle, observant, the warm heart that softened her husband's stern edges. To outsiders, she was the perfect wife, calming arguments, keeping holidays connected, offering quiet counsel. But mothers carry burdens no one else sees. Grace had always been watchful, especially around Samuel. Over the years, Daniel had caught her staring at her eldest son with a mixture of fierce love and something else, something that looked almost like guilt or fear. She buried it well. When Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi finally passed, the entire community turned out in force. The church overflowed. Old friends spoke of his integrity. Former employees praised his fairness. Neighbors remembered his unexpected generosity. Samuel stood at the front, receiving condolences with dignified composure, every inch the air. Daniel stayed close to his mother, managing the endless stream of mourners while quietly noting who lingered too long and who whispered too closely. For one day, shared grief papered over the cracks, but grief does not erase old tensions. It only delays them. 3 days after the burial, when the borrowed chairs had been returned and the flood of visitors had slowed to a trickle, the family gathered once more in the living room. They came to discuss practical matters: the future of Adeyemi Transport, the house, the farmland outside town, the will that had not yet been fully read. None of them realized this meeting would become the spark. Beneath the polite talk of shares, responsibilities, and what Dad would have wanted, years of resentment, silent comparisons, and buried family secrets waited like dry tinder. All it would take was one careless sentence, spoken in anger, meant only to wound, to light the fuse. Not a sentence that would transform a simple discussion about inheritance into something far more dangerous. A question about who truly belonged to the man they had just buried, and what price had been paid to keep that illusion alive for 40 years. The house felt different after the funeral. The constant hum of condolences had faded. Borrowed chairs were returned. The large cooking pots in the backyard that had fed hundreds were gone. What remained was a heavy, watchful silence, the kind that settles when the central pillar of a family is suddenly missing. On the third evening, the Adeyemi children gathered in the living room. Golden, late-afternoon light sliced through half-drawn curtains striping the floor. Chief Emmanuel's framed photograph sat on a side table, a half-melted candle beneath it casting flickering shadows across his stern, knowing face. The air still carried the faint scent of incense and wilting flowers. Mrs. Grace Adeyemi sat in her usual chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. Samuel sat near the window, back straight, in hands resting calmly on his knees, every inch the composed air. Daniel leaned against the dining table, arms folded, jaw tight. Tunde sat slightly apart, phone in hand, pretending to be disengaged. Bissy stayed close to their mother, her eyes moving nervously between her brothers. For several long minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat. "We should discuss practical matters," he said, voice measured and gentle. Dad would have wanted things organized. No one disagreed. He continued smoothly. "The transport company needs clear leadership soon. The drivers are already asking questions. We also need to settle the farmland and the house." The conversation began politely enough. Paperwork, the lawyer who had structured the business years ago, legal next steps. But when the talk shifted to inheritance and how the estate should be divided, the temperature in the room changed. Daniel shifted his weight. "There's something we should consider before we start dividing anything." Samuel glanced at him. "What?" Daniel hesitated only a moment, then spoke, voice steady but edged. "For the last 2 years, I was the one here, every day, taking care of Dad. Hospital runs at 3 a.m., medication schedules, nights when he couldn't breathe. I left my job in Lagos, put my entire life on hold." The room grew quieter. Daniel looked around slowly. "I'm not complaining. I chose it. But the sacrifice wasn't equal. When we talk about shares, that should count for something." Samuel's expression remained carefully neutral, but his jaw tightened. "So you're saying you deserve a larger portion?" "I'm saying fairness matters," Daniel replied, meeting his brother's eyes. "The situation wasn't the same for all of us." Samuel leaned back slightly, spreading his hands in that calm, authoritative way their father used to. "Nobody forced you to stay, Daniel. We all had responsibilities, jobs, families, our own lives in the city. You made your choice." The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Nobody forced me. Someone had to be here when he was dying." Samuel's voice stayed controlled, but the edge sharpened. "And the rest of us supported him financially. That wasn't nothing." "That's not the same thing," Daniel snapped, frustration finally breaking through. "Money is easy. Being here every single night, or watching him suffer, that's different." Bissy leaned forward nervously. "Please, let's take this slowly." But it was already too late. Samuel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're speaking as if the rest of us abandoned him." "I didn't say that." "But you're implying it," Samuel shot back. "As if only your sacrifice counts." Daniel exhaled sharply. "I gave up more than anyone else during those 2 years. That's simply fact." Samuel's eyes narrowed further. Then he let out a short, irritated laugh, the kind that carried years of stored resentment. "Fairness?" he repeated mockingly. "If we're suddenly measuring fairness in this family, maybe we should measure everything." Daniel's voice turned ice cold. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Samuel paused for half a second. Then the anger slipped free. "Yeah, you want to talk about who deserves what? Then perhaps we should first establish who the real sons actually are." The room froze. The sentence hung in the air like thunder. Bissy's eyes widened in horror. Tunde looked up sharply from his phone. Mrs. Grace's head lifted slowly, her face suddenly pale. Daniel blinked, stunned. "What did you just say?" Samuel waved a dismissive hand, though his smirk didn't reach his eyes. "Relax. I'm only saying, if we're going to start calculating entitlement and sacrifice, we should be sure about everything first." Daniel stared at him, heart pounding. "Be sure about what, Samuel?" Samuel leaned back, the smirk fading into something colder. "You know exactly what I mean." The insult was no longer veiled. It was cruel, deliberate. Bissy jumped in quickly. "Samuel, that is not funny." Tunde attempted an awkward laugh. "Yeah, unless we all line up for DNA tests or something." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, trying to diffuse the moment. But Samuel only shrugged. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea." He looked directly at Daniel, eyes hard. At least then we'd know exactly who we're dividing the company between. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with unspoken accusations and old wounds. Daniel forced a tight, dangerous smile. "You think this is funny?" Samuel shrugged again. "This whole conversation has become ridiculous." Mrs. Grace shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her voice soft but final. "Enough." Her quiet authority ended the argument instantly. The siblings looked away from one another. The meeting broke up soon after. No decisions were made. One by one, they drifted out of the living room, but Daniel could not shake Samuel's words. They echoed in his head like a challenge he could not ignore. Maybe we should first establish who the real sons are. It had been meant as a cruel jab, a way to put the second son back in his place. Everyone else treated it as just another heated remark, everyone except Daniel. Later that night, lying awake in the suffocating quiet of the house, the sentence refused to die. At first he told himself it was nothing, then he told himself it was ridiculous. But sometime after midnight, a darker, more dangerous thought took shape. What if the test proved Samuel wrong once and for all? What if it finally silenced his arrogance? What if it gave Daniel the leverage he had quietly wanted for years? The more he turned it over, the more reasonable it seemed. A simple, harmless, just information. A few days later, without telling a soul, Daniel drove to a small laboratory in the city and ordered a DNA paternity test using his father's preserved hospital samples and a swab from Samuel. He told himself it was only to prove a point. He never imagined that one resentful decision would tear open secrets far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than anyone in the Adeyemi family had ever suspected. Secrets that could destroy not only their brotherhood, but the entire carefully constructed legacy their father had left behind. In the days after the argument, the Adeyemi house settled into an uneasy, almost theatrical calm. On the surface, life continued. Meals were eaten, condolences were still received. The transport company's daily operations demanded attention. But beneath the polite routines, something fundamental had shifted, like a fault line opening slowly underground. No one mentioned Samuel's cutting remark again, yet it lingered in every room, poisoning the air. Daniel felt it most sharply in the silences. Before their father's death, the house had pulsed with overlapping voices, sudden laughter, and their mother's familiar call from the kitchen. Now conversations were careful, measured, almost scripted. Samuel remained impeccably polite, but the easy brotherhood had vanished. They spoke only of practical matters, driver schedules, fuel costs, legal documents the lawyer required, messages from distant relatives still offering condolences. Nothing personal, nothing real. An invisible wall had risen between the two eldest sons. Every time Daniel looked at Samuel, the words echoed. Maybe we should first establish who the real sons are. Thrown casually in anger, landed like a blade. Daniel told himself the tension would pass, but deep down, he knew the insult had cracked open something that had been festering for years. Not just sibling rivalry, but a quiet, corrosive doubt about worth, favor, and belonging. 2 days after the argument, Daniel drove alone to a discreet laboratory on the outskirts of Port Harcourt. He kept repeating to himself that it was merely a formality, a way to silence Samuel's arrogance once and for all. The receptionist barely glanced up as she slid the forms across the counter. DNA paternity comparison, results usually within a week. Daniel nodded, his heartbeat unnaturally loud in his ears. He provided the samples in silence, a swab from his own cheek, just in case, and, most critically, Samuel's cheek swab taken earlier that morning under the pretense of updating family medical records. He also submitted his father's preserved hospital DNA sample. As the technician sealed the envelopes, a flicker of genuine doubt crossed Daniel's mind. Am I really doing this? But the decision had already hardened. The samples were sent, and the waiting began. Back at the house, Daniel started noticing cracks in his mother's carefully maintained composure. Whenever the topic of inheritance or the lawyer's pending documents arose, Mrs. Grace Adeyemi grew visibly tense. Not angry, not defensive, just watchful, almost frightened. One evening, while Samuel and Tunde discussed the company's future at the dining table, Daniel casually mentioned that the lawyer would soon need formal confirmation of the heirs. His mother's knife froze mid-slice over the vegetables, only for a heartbeat. Then she continued cutting, but her hands were no longer steady. Later that night, Daniel found her sitting alone on the veranda, staring into the darkness as if searching for something long lost. "Mom, are you all right?" She offered a small smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm fine, my son." But Daniel felt a cold unease settle in his stomach. For the first time, he wondered whether she somehow sensed what he had done. That was impossible, of course. He had told no one, or so he believed. Outside the compound, whispers had already begun spreading through the extended family and community like smoke. Funerals in tight-knit towns have a way of resurrecting old stories. A cousin who had been present during the argument mentioned it casually to another relative. They almost came to blows over the inheritance. Someone else added, "I even heard talk of a DNA test." Within days, the rumor had traveled through phone calls, market conversations, and late-night visits. Most dismissed it as typical sibling friction after a patriarch's death. But gossip has power. It magnifies small cracks into visible fissures. When relatives came to the house to pay respects or discuss business, Daniel noticed the change. Longer glances between him and Samuel, curious eyes lingering on their mother, and awkward pauses when the transport company was mentioned. Nothing was said openly, yet the unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. What really happened in that meeting? How deep does the bad blood run? The waiting became torture. Daniel checked his email obsessively. Morning, afternoon, deep into the night. Every notification made his pulse spike. He tried to convince himself the results would be straightforward. Confirmation, vindication. But as the days stretched, uncomfortable thoughts began creeping in. What if the test reveals something unexpected? What if it complicates more than just Samuel's position? He dismissed the fears quickly. That only happens in movies. Families know their own children. Still, the unease refused to leave. It grew like a shadow at the edge of his vision. The rift between the brothers widened, and Samuel began spending longer hours in town, handling business, though Daniel suspected he was simply avoiding the house. Daniel stayed behind, helping organize their father's papers and belongings, quietly noting old documents, faded photographs, and strange financial entries that now seemed worth closer inspection. They spoke only when necessary, and even then, every word felt loaded. BC noticed the growing fracture. One afternoon, she pulled Daniel into the kitchen. "You and Samuel need to calm down," she whispered urgently. "This tension is poisoning everything." "We are calm," Daniel replied. BC gave him a long, skeptical look. "No, you're quiet. That's worse." She sighed, voice softening. "Dad just died. This is not the time for the two of you to tear each other apart over old wounds." Daniel leaned against the counter. "I'm not competing." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. Part of him still burned to prove Samuel wrong, to finally win, to make his years of sacrifice count for something tangible. BC studied his face carefully. "Whatever is going on in your head, don't let it destroy this family." Daniel forced a small smile. "It won't." But inside, the knot in his chest tightened. Because by then, the samples had already been processed. The truth Whatever it was already on its way. As the week dragged on, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, almost suffocating. Small details felt increasingly wrong. Their mother rose earlier than usual, often sitting alone on the veranda with a cup of tea before dawn, staring into the distance as if waiting for bad news. And Samuel grew noticeably impatient during even minor conversations, his usual calm cracking at the edges. Tunda kept his distance, visiting less frequently, as though sensing the storm gathering. No one could name exactly what had changed, but everyone felt it, like a quiet storm building just beyond the horizon, unseen, yet impossible to ignore. Then, late one Thursday night while the house slept, Daniel's phone pinged with a single email notification. DNA results available. Simple, ordinary, yet powerful enough to alter the entire story of the Adeyemi family. Within seconds of opening that message, Daniel would realize something truly terrifying. The test had not simply proven Samuel wrong. It had torn open a secret far older, far more complicated, and far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. A secret that threatened to unravel not only their brotherhood, but the very foundation of their father's carefully guarded legacy. The email arrived on a quiet Thursday night at 11:47 p.m. The house had already surrendered to sleep. Samuel had returned late from town. Tunde was back in Abuja. Bisi had taken her children home. Only Daniel remained awake in the living room where the fatal argument had erupted exactly 1 week earlier. The same room, the same heavy air. His father's framed photograph watched from the small wooden table, the candle now a thin pool of hardened wax. The wall clock ticked with merciless precision. Daniel clicked the notification. DNA test results available. The report loaded slowly. He scrolled past the technical data until the conclusion struck like a silent detonation. The tested individual shows no biological paternal relationship to the alleged father. Daniel's body went still. He read it again and again. Names confirmed: alleged father, Emmanuel Adeyemi. Tested individual, Samuel Adeyemi. Samuel, not him. The golden firstborn, the heir, the man the entire town already treated as the next chief. Daniel's throat went dry. He checked every line, desperate for a mistake. There was none. The evidence was cold and undeniable. If Samuel carried none of their father's blood, then who did? What about me? Did their father know? The questions slammed into him. This single report had not only shattered Samuel's identity, it had dropped an unbearable responsibility into Daniel's hands. He was now the only one who knew the truth. He could delete the email, bury it, let the comfortable lie continue. But he knew he couldn't. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. The room plunged into near darkness, broken only by faint hallway light. He sat motionless, listening to the old wall clock tick relentlessly, the quiet house now feeling like it belonged to strangers. In that moment, the story of the Adeyemi family split into two irreconcilable versions. The one everyone still believed, clean, proud, built on blood and legacy, and the dangerous new one that only Daniel now knew. Sleep was impossible. Bare feet silent on the cold tiles, Daniel rose and moved through the shadowed hallway toward his father's study, the one room that still carried the old man's disciplined scent of engine oil, old paper, and faded cologne. The study door stood ajar. A single drawer in the heavy wooden desk was half open, as if deliberately left that way. Daniel pulled it fully open. Inside lay a thin, faded ribbon, binding yellowed photographs and letters. His fingers trembled as he untied it. The house no longer felt the same. Not just quieter, different. As if something old and buried had begun to breathe again. The top photograph was faded at the edges. A much younger Grace stood beside Emmanuel. They smiled, but the distance between them was unmistakable. Daniel frowned and kept flipping. The third photograph stopped him cold. His mother stood beside another man, tall, commanding presence, expensive clothes. His hand rested possessively on her shoulder. Daniel turned it over. A date, 41 years ago, 1 year before Samuel was born. That same night, Daniel found his mother on the veranda. "Mom," she looked up. Recognition, not surprise, filled her eyes. "You found something." Daniel sat. "There's a man in the pictures." She exhaled, long, tired, and something inside her finally loosened. "I was never supposed to marry your father," she said quietly. "There was someone else, powerful, the kind of man who takes what he wants." Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers tightened. "I got pregnant." The words landed heavy. "He said the child would be taken care of, but not by him. He had a reputation, a family, connections. I was a risk." She looked into the darkness. "That was when your father stepped in." "Your father knew," she continued. "I told him before we married. He still chose me, chose the child." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "Why?" Her eyes filled with quiet pain. "He said, a child should not suffer for the mistakes of adults." He knew the cost, the whispers, the doubt, the risk that truth would one day surface. Yet he chose us, every single day. Daniel's mind spun. But why hide it for 40 years? Her expression darkened. "Because that man never really left. Power doesn't disappear, Daniel. It waits, it watches, it protects itself. He made it clear, some truths should never come out." She looked at him fully, her voice cracking. "I wasn't just protecting Samuel, I was protecting all of you." The night air felt heavier now, denser. Daniel sat frozen, the pieces rearranging violently in his mind. Samuel was not simply the product of an affair. He was the result of power, silence, protection, and a man who chose love over blood. "Does Samuel know any of this?" Daniel asked. "No." "Did Dad ever tell him?" "No." A long silence stretched between them. Then Daniel asked the question that mattered most. "Is that man still alive?" His mother didn't answer. Her silence said everything. The morning after the truth settled into his bones, the house felt suffocating. Not quiet, not tense, suffocating. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what came next. Breakfast was a silent performance. Plates were set, tea poured, chairs scraped against the floor, but no one was truly present. Samuel sat at the head of the table, newspaper open, eyes fixed on nothing. His composure was intact, yet something in him had permanently shifted. Bissy moved carefully, her gaze darting between her brothers. Tunda stayed half buried in his phone. Their mother said almost nothing. Her silence was no longer gentle. It was deliberate, heavy, guarded. Daniel barely touched his food. The weight he now carried was no longer emotional. It was dangerous. He had imagined this moment as a clean victory. Samuel humbled, and his own sacrifices finally acknowledged. But the truth had no clean edges. On one side stood the truth, sharp, final, irreversible. Revealing it would strip Samuel of his identity, his place in the community, his inheritance, and his name. It would expose their mother's past and tarnish their father's legacy of integrity, turning a respected man into someone who had lived a 40-year lie. On the other side lay silence. Delete the report. Destroy the evidence. Let the comfortable illusion continue. But Daniel now understood the cost. Silence was not peace. It was protection. And protection always demands payment. If this secret had been buried for 40 years, who else had a stake in keeping it buried? The man in the photograph, powerful, still present, the kind of man who doesn't forget. Power doesn't disappear. It waits, it watches, it protects itself. This was no longer just a family secret. It was a controlled silence. Later that morning, Daniel found her on the veranda. "Mom?" She turned. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Not guilt, but raw fear. He sat beside her without hesitation. "Is he still alive?" Her lips parted, then closed. The silence was answer enough. "Does he know about Samuel?" "I don't know," she whispered. That uncertainty frightened him more than any yes. She suddenly gripped his hand, her fingers surprisingly strong. "If this comes out, it won't stop with this family." Her voice trembled. "He once told me some things are better left untouched, not because they are shameful, but because they are dangerous." The words hung in the air like smoke. The rest of the day stretched like a wire pulled tight. Every glance felt loaded. The Samuel's silence now looked like a man standing on cracking ground. Bisi's concern felt fragile. Tundi's withdrawal felt less like disinterest and more like instinct. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place built on something unsettled, something that had just begun to stir. Daniel paced the veranda, the truth circling him like a storm he could neither escape nor control. If he spoke, he would trigger consequences he could not predict. If he stayed silent, he would become part of the very silence that had shaped their lives. Either way, innocence was gone. The tension had already shattered. The pieces were now spreading through the house like cracks in dry earth. For 2 days, no one spoke the truth aloud. But it poisoned every silence. Daniel knew he could no longer carry it alone. That evening, as shadows bled across the compound, he gathered them in the living room, the same room where the first crack had appeared. "Everyone," he said. His voice was quiet, too quiet. They came slowly. Samuel first, eyes already guarded. Bisi uneasy. Tunde leaning against the wall. Their mother stopped just inside the doorway, as if crossing the threshold would make it real. Daniel looked at them, then spoke the words that could never be taken back. "The DNA test is real." Samuel's jaw tightened. "We've been through this. You're not Dad's biological son." The words dropped like stones into still water. Samuel let out a short, hollow breath. "You really believe repeating it makes it true?" "It's not just the report," Daniel said. "There's someone else." The air in the room changed instantly. Their mother's voice cut through like a blade. "Daniel, enough." But he didn't stop. "I found photographs, letters, a powerful man. He knew about you, Samuel, and he chose not to claim you." Samuel stood very still. Then something inside him seemed to fracture. "And Dad?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "He knew," Daniel said softly. "He knew enough, and he still chose you." Samuel staggered back half a step as if the floor had tilted. "So everything I thought I was..." His voice cracked. "I buried him with my own hands. I carried his name. I stood beside him for 40 years, and I was never his?" Bisi stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "He raised you. He chose you." "Chosen?" Samuel's laugh was bitter, broken. "Or just tolerated? A secret he was forced to swallow?" He turned slowly to their mother. The question burned in his eyes before he even spoke it. "Is he still alive?" Mrs. Grace closed her eyes. The silence was heavier than any answer. Samuel's face changed, anger giving way to something colder, darker. "That's why you never spoke," he said quietly. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting him." "I was protecting all of you," she whispered, voice trembling, "from something that does not forget." Samuel turned back to Daniel. His eyes were burning. "So this is what you've done. You didn't just bring truth into this house. You brought danger with it." The room held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. As Samuel looked slowly around. At the walls that had raised him. At the faces he thought he knew. At the life that no longer belonged to him. Then he asked the question that changed everything. So what happens if the truth doesn't stay here? No one had an answer, because in that moment they all understood they had crossed a line, and whatever came next would not be contained inside these walls. Daniel felt the weight settle deep in his chest, cold, certain, and final. He had not revealed a secret. He had set something in motion. The days after the confrontation brought no relief, only awareness, the kind that settles deep and refuses to leave. The house was no longer quiet. It was watchful. Every movement felt observed. Every silence carried weight. Something unseen had taken interest in what had been set in motion. Samuel withdrew first, not with anger, but with deliberate distance. He walked the compound perimeter for hours, as if searching for boundaries he could still trust, in the family and in himself. The anger in his eyes had cooled into something sharper. Awareness. He was no longer asking, "Who am I?" He was asking, "Who else knows?" BC tried desperately to hold normalcy together. Meals, small conversations, forced laughter. But everything felt fragile, like thin glass under pressure. Tunde, for the first time, stopped pretending distance was safety. But he stayed, watched, listened. Instinct told him this storm could no longer be outrun. The ripple began subtly, a call that ended too quickly. A business associate who suddenly sounded cautious. A driver who let slip that people in town were asking questions. Not directly, never directly, but enough. One afternoon in the office, Samuel paused mid-conversation and looked at Daniel. "Have you noticed?" he asked quietly. "People are watching." Daniel had. The longer stares, the sudden silences when they entered a room. The family name had not been publicly challenged, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. In a place like Port Harcourt, that was more than enough. Mrs. Grace became a ghost of caution. She spoke less, lingered nowhere, and weighed every word as if danger hid inside them. One evening, and Daniel found her standing by the window, staring into the darkness. "Mom." She turned slowly. Her eyes held recognition, not just fear. "It has started," she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. "What has?" "The movement." Her voice dropped even lower. "When truth shifts, the people who have an interest feel it. We were never the only ones keeping that silence." Inside the house, trust had not shattered completely, but it had cracked in ways that changed how everything held. Samuel and Daniel spoke, but carefully. Every sentence carried history. Every pause carried meaning. One night in the yard, Samuel stood beside him in silence before speaking. "You didn't just tell the truth. You changed the structure of everything." Daniel exhaled. "I know," Samuel nodded. "And now we don't know who else is standing on it." The business continued. It had to. Drivers needed direction. Payments had to be made. The world did not pause for their collapse. But the name Adeyemi no longer felt like simple inheritance. It felt like something that had to be carried, maintained, protected. One evening, Samuel ran his hand slowly along the old truck their father once drove. "He was still my father," he said quietly. Not defensive, not angry, just certain. And this time, the words carried understanding. They did not fall apart, but they would never return to what they once were. They learned to sit with discomfort, to speak more carefully, to live knowing that not everything visible was complete. Some bonds deepened, others remained fragile, and beneath it all, a quiet awareness remained. This was not over. Somewhere beyond the walls of the house, and beyond the business and the conversations they thought were private, other people, other connections, other histories had begun to stir. They now had reason to move. Daniel stood alone one night in the living room, the same room where everything fractured. He looked at his father's photograph, then at the door. For the first time, he understood clearly. The story was not ending. Something that had waited 40 years had just been given a reason to return. Weeks passed, not enough to heal, but enough to understand that healing would never look the way they once imagined. The house found a new rhythm, slower, more deliberate. Voices returned to the dining table, but they were softer now, measured, as if every word carried the weight of things that could never be undone. Samuel was the last to fully return. For days he lived on the edges. Long walks, late nights, quiet hours in his father's study. He was no longer searching for answers. He was learning to sit with their absence. One evening, he took his usual seat at the table without ceremony. The conversation was ordinary. Food, work, small updates. Yet everyone felt the shift. Not backward, forward. Later that night, he found Daniel outside. They stood side by side in silence until Samuel spoke. "I don't know who I was before this, but I know who I choose to be now." A quiet beat. "I'm still his son." Daniel nodded. "That part was never taken from you." Samuel exhaled. "Then everything else, we rebuild." Trust returned in fragments, a shared conversation, a moment of honesty, the decision not to walk away. Daniel and Samuel began working together again, carefully, every step earned. Bissy remained the quiet thread holding them together. Tunde grew more present, watchful, and aware. Mrs. Grace changed the most. The weight she had carried alone for decades was now shared. One evening, as the family sat together, she said softly, "Some truths don't end when they are revealed." She paused. "They begin." They understood. Outside the compound, life moved on. The business continued. The community watched, quietly, carefully. Nothing had been exposed publicly. Not yet. Oh, but the family no longer believed anything was fully contained. They had learned that truth does not always explode. Sometimes it simply moves. The Adeyemi family did not return to what it was. It couldn't. The past had been rewritten. The future was no longer predictable. What remained was something quieter, but stronger. Choice. The daily decision to remain, to speak, to rebuild, without pretending the cracks had vanished. On a Sunday morning, they gathered in the garden where their father once sat at dawn. The light was soft, the air still. Samuel looked at them all. "We can't go back," he said, "but we can decide what we carry forward." He paused. "I choose this family." Daniel stepped closer. "So do I." Their mother placed a hand on both of them, not to hold them together, but to honor what they had chosen. And the moment felt peaceful, earned, but not complete. Because as the light settled across the garden and the house stood behind them, heavy with memory and silence, one truth remained unspoken. Some stories do not end when they are told. Some wait. And somewhere beyond what they could see, pieces of the past had not yet decided whether to stay buried. As the Adeyemi family began to rebuild, one truth settled quietly but firmly. Family is never held together by blood alone, nor by inheritance, nor by the stories we have always believed. Sometimes those stories are incomplete. Sometimes they are protected. Sometimes they are built on silence. What remains is more demanding: choice, the quiet daily decision to stay, to love, and to stand together. Even when the truth is uncomfortable and the foundation is no longer what it seemed. The DNA test uncovered a hidden past, but it also revealed something deeper. Fatherhood is not proven by blood, but by presence, sacrifice, and the courage to choose a child knowing the full truth. This story leaves us with an honest question. Is family defined by blood, or by the people who choose you, stand with you, and remain when it would be easier to walk away? Take a moment. Who in your life has truly chosen you? Who have you chosen? Because family is not only what we inherit, it is what we build, what we protect, and sometimes what we must carry, even when the ground beneath us shifts. If this story touched you, reflect honestly. Blood or love? Which one would you stand on?